Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. I'm excited. Thanks for the invitation. So yeah, this is some work. So I am a PhD student over at the University of Georgia right now. But this work was, at least the example I'm going to be showing here at the beginning, was a part of my master's thesis that just got published in the journal Castania, which is published by the Southern Appalachian Botanical Society. So very excited to be talking about it. I'm a plant nerd. I know this is a pretty broad audience, so I'm going to try to convince y'all thoroughly through this talk also that plants are just cool. So yeah, so to get off this first example that I'll be talking about for utilizing habitat, well, let me put it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through one full example of kind of what habitat suitability models are, how they're built, and then how they're applied with, and I'm going to use this species, mountain Stewartia. But then I'm going to show you a couple other examples that I've been working on and that kind of are in review right now as well. So to get started, I'm give you a little background on the species that I'll be talking about. This is mountain Stewartia, Stewartia ovata. It's a beautiful understory to mid-story tree, kind of shrubby. It kind of looks like a dogwood for those of you that are familiar, but a little bit cooler. It's a pretty rare species also. When you do find it, you don't often find a lot of them. And what really attracted me to it are these beautiful blooms that you can see there. So this species is found across the kind of mid-south and southern Appalachians. The center of the range, I think y'all can y'all see can you see my mouse?
Yeah, we can.
Cool, awesome. The center of the range is kind of North Georgia right here in southeast Tennessee. But it also does come up over on the Cumberland Plateau, populations in Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Alabama, and then they also do sneak over into Mississippi. So the reason I was interested in this species is because it is considered imperiled, critically imperiled, or vulnerable across much of its range. It's kind of an old map from NatureServe now. For those of you that aren't aware, NatureServe is a organization, nonprofit that rates the vulnerability of species across Texas, so plants, animals, fish, anything. And then it's kind of a lot of that data that goes into whether or not a species gets formally listed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as endangered or something like that. So mountain Stewartia, the species we're talking about, as you can see, it's imperiled in Virginia, vulnerable in North Carolina, vulnerable in Kentucky, imperiled in South Carolina, vulnerable in Georgia. In Mississippi, it's critically imperiled. So kind of the point of this slide is that we are dealing with a species of conservation concern. So now to get to the fun kind of techie stuff, to develop this habitat suitability model, I used a software known as MaxEnt. They don't have a good logo or anything, so this is just kind of a cut of their homepage where you download the software. But what MaxEnt is able to do is it needs two types of data. It needs environmental data in the form of raster data sets. So think of these as maps with data associated with them. So maybe precipitation over the whole state of South Carolina, or average summer temperature over Mississippi, or something like that. And every, let's say, 100 by 100 meters has its own individual data point associated with it. So what we do is we stack all of those grids and all those layers on top of one another, and then we add occurrences, known occurrences on top of those. And basically what we're able to do is through machine learning and through maximum entropy, we're able to pull out areas across the landscape of high conservation or high habitat suitability to focus on for conservation action. So that's a kind of a quick and dirty intro to MaxEnt. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I did with before I'm getting ahead of myself. So I just kind of cut some some papers that have used MaxEnt just to kind of show you some of the ways that this software has been used. So this is one for a medicinal plant in the Himalayas. We're a rose endemic in Egypt. It's also used pretty frequently for modeling invasive species and trying to think about how a species might be able to invade across a new territory. Here's an oak species that was modeled across Italy. This one was I really particularly like this one because of the conservation insights that it gives for this oak species. And then it can also be used for other taxa, such as birds or fish or something like that. Cool. So for my habitat suitability model for the mountain stewardia, we used 13 known populations from basically my advisor already knew about these populations. He had actually written one of his dissertation chapters on the same species. So he had data or 13 known occurrences. Then I pulled 25 occurrences from iNaturalist. I know a lot of people are aware, but for those of you that aren't, iNaturalist is this very cool, think of it kind of like a social media type page for nature nerds. And what you can do is you can go out into the woods and you can take a picture of any species, bird, tree, fish. And then iNaturalist has some great algorithms for identifying that species for you. And then you can post it to the World Wide Web. And if at least 2 other people on the iNaturalist platform agree with your identification, then it becomes what we call research grade. And then people like me can use those occurrences in their modeling or in their research. So I got 25 occurrences from iNaturalist. Then I got 22 more occurrences from Saranac. So Saranac is a collaboration of herbarium across the Southeast. And so I know, so that might be something new for some of y'all, what a herbarium is. Herbariums is super cool. Think of it like a collection or a library of dead plants. I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with those pictures of like the American Natural History Museum, where they have all those beautiful pictures of butterflies, or they have fish in jars. Same thing, only this is for plants, and a lot of times it has very good data that we can use. For example, like these occurrences that I use in my modeling. So that gave me a total of 60 occurrences to use in this model. Okay, so next I'm going to talk to you about that environmental data. So the environmental data is just those basically maps with data associated with individual little spots across that map. So here's that table of all the variables that I put into the model. So the first one that we used was elevation. Then we looked at mean precipitation. We also had some indication that mountain stewardia was like to be close to water, not necessarily right on it or in riparian zone, but close to water. Also, we had some soil variables such as the percent sand in the soil. Also, some climatic variables, max temp, min VBT is minimum vapor pressure deficit. So that's kind of a way to look at how much water is in the air. It's not exactly like humidity, but kind of like it. And then soil pH, heat load is just another way to look at the aspect. Instead of doing like north, south, east, or west for an aspect of a slope, heat load is more like it's a value between 0 and 360. And then we also had indication that the species like to be around other conifers, mostly eastern hemlock. If y'all are familiar with the area, very beautiful, big, majestic eastern hemlock. So we made a layer that was proportion of conifer cover in a given cell. So what we did is we threw all this into MaxEnt, and I'll leave kind of more technical aspects. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to talk about it. But then we get a pretty map like this one, where let me talk you through what we're looking at here. So here's the continental United States. We're looking in what is shaded here, so that's the most of the southeast. And if you look at the map, the habitat suitability goes from 0 to 1, 1 being the highest habitat suitability. So as you can see, our model indicated that, which kind of made sense, the highest habitat suitability was in southeast Tennessee, North Georgia, extreme western North Carolina, kind of where we're expecting, and then coming down the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee and into Alabama. These black dots do indicate those occurrences. And then we also were interested in how much of this area was actually currently protected. So we overlaid this kind of maroon layer, which is public protected land. And as you can see, a pretty good portion of the land that was projected to be at highest habitat suitability was that on public land. So just to give you a little, so let's see here. This is Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We got the Cherokee National Forest. Most of this right here is the Nantahala National Forest, Chattahoochee National Forest. Yeah, and then this is the Bankhead, Bankhead National Forest. Pretty sure. I think that's right. So yeah, so it was pretty cool. And using this map, we're able to highlight areas that we can then go into and figure out, and this gives us a way to prioritize the areas to say, hey, this may be a good area for reintroduction of the species of conservation concern, or this is a good place to conserve a population because we know it's in an area of high suitable habitat. Yeah, so I'll have a couple more of these maps towards the presentation, but I'll kind of go through the rest of the results of this model. Another thing that is really cool about this MaxEnt model is it can actually tell us how much each of one of those environmental variables contributed to the overall model. So here you can see elevation contributed almost 40% to the model. So if I flip back, that means that overall, of those map layers that were squished together, elevation was the thing that kind of contributed the most at 40%. And then it was just mean precipitation. Ended up distance to water was fairly important for the species at 19%, and then so on. What was very surprising to us and kind of contradictory to some findings of my advisor was that the proportion of conifer cover really didn't contribute much to the model. So this is just another way that these MaxEnt models can be used, is not only can we create these maps, but we can actually learn something about the habitat and the natural history of these species, where they like to grow, what is the habitat they like to grow in. Okay, so this next slide is a little bit on the technical side, but I'll walk you through it anyways. So this regularization, so on the y-axis we have test AUC. It's area under the operating curve. People like to kind of interpret it like an AIC, but it's not exactly the same. However, to give you a quick reminder on AIC, so there's kind of two main parts to that. The actual estimate of fit, but then the AICs and BICs for that matter have on the back end of them, they have a penalty for over parameterization. And so that's what this regularization multiplier on the x-axis is for every additional parameter that the model throws, it penalizes it that much more. So you can see our fit AUC kind of goes up around the regularization multiplier of 1 and then drops back down. It's a little kind of nerding out on these models. If anybody has any questions about that, I'd love to answer them. Okay, so I included this graph because I thought it was cool, and I got told I can nerd out. So, you know what? I'm going to a little bit. So on the y-axis here, we have the test AUC. That's just a metric of fit for the model. But then what we were able to do is I divided all of those environmental variables up to see what contributed the most if I were to divide them into some categories. So I divided them into like soil variables, climate variables, physical variables, and then I like also combined them: soil plus climate, soil plus physical, climatic versus physical, and then all variables. And so basically what this is showing is that the soil plus the climatic, if I only ran those variables alone, I got an AUC of 0.94, which is pretty good. So it's just a cool way to use these models to really learn about what's important to these species. So what's all this mean? Thrown all together, what does all this mean? So the model presented allows plant conservationists to potentially locate undocumented populations of Mountain Stewartia and identify suitable areas for the establishment of new populations. Also, this approach provides a framework for using citizen science, so that's that iNaturalist records, and natural history records, that's those herbarium records, for modeling of other rare plants with limited occurrence data. So that's what I did in my most recent publication, and that's in Castania. You should all go download it and cite it and all your stuff. That'd be really awesome, and read it. So, but I also wanted to talk about a couple other examples that I've been working on. Well, I should say some cooler examples. So here is a habitat suitability model that I created for, this is Miller's witch alder, Phallogella milleri, and you can see it's got this really cool, pretty flower. For those of you that might be plant people, this is very closely related to witch alder, witch hazel in the Hylidaceae family. But what's really cool about this particular model is that the species was only recently described in March of 2020, so not that long ago. And this is one of the first attempt at this. So right now, if you look down here, extent occurrence data, so these circles are the only known occurrences of this species, current occurrences of this species. However, these diamonds are historic occurrence data. So these were populations that were extirpated and are no longer there. And so what we were able to do, and it was very technical and model, like kind of diving into these parameters, but we were able to create a model that was able to predict habitat suitability for this species off so few occurrences, which is, I thought was really awesome. And it gives us at least a framework to start looking at, okay, where can we find more populations of this species? Okay, there's only 4 known populations. Where can we plant more of this species out? So this is one, and a little foreshadowing, this paper just got accepted well, I don't think it got accepted, but it got minor revisions in the Natural Areas Journal, which I'm really excited about. A couple wording things, and this thing should be coming out pretty soon. I'm pretty excited about that. The last thing I'm going to show you is another habitat suitability model that I created for the Etowah darter. So this is a fish species, and I am a plant person. So a little background. I was between my master's and my PhD over the summer, and I wanted to do something research-wise, but I wanted to push myself a little bit. So I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to develop a habitat suitability model for an endangered fish. And by God, that's what I did. And it was really fun. So as you can imagine, the environmental variables for the species are a lot different. It has to do with water quality and gradient and the land use cover. But I was able to model the habitat suitability for the species in this kind of river network way, so that land managers can actually go into these actual stretches of water. And well, first of all, I should say, all these models, a biologist that's familiar with the species needs to look at it and go on these sites and see if it makes sense. But beyond that, land managers and conservationists can go to these areas and of this massive watershed. So this is the Etowah River basin. You can see where it is, just north of Atlanta. And it starts to break it down for them and look at where we can actually introduce this species or where we should be conserving it more and those kind of things. So I'm really excited about this. Hopefully, the actual manuscript for this paper is still in the works. I did present it at a fish conference, which was a Southeastern Fishes Council, which was really cool because being a plant nerd or a plant person, it was really kind of different to go to an all fish conference. But really, when it came down to it, it was basically the same kind of people. It's just at plant conferences, they wear Hawaiian shirts with plants on it, and at the fish conference, they wore Hawaiian shirts with fish on it. But yeah, so that's all I really had. I didn't know how long to go for it. I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of what these habitat suitability models are, how conservationists can kind of use them, and kind of some of the cool ways they can be used for different species. So yeah, if anybody has any questions or wants to talk more about it, I'd be happy to. I've also listed my Georgia email there. If you're the collaborating type, I am always open to collaborations. That's what makes doing this fun. And then my Twitter account and the obligatory funding statements. So yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. That was a fantastic talk, and that's really cool stuff that you're doing. So
thanks.
We'll go ahead and jump straight into the questions. Got a few here. So you talked about the I'm forgetting the right word for it now. The network of herbariums in the Southeast. Are there similar networks throughout the whole country? And are there any places in, let's say, to keep it to keep it shorter, let's say within the U.S. That are lacking them?
I don't know about the lacking part.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there are consortiums like this. So it was Saranac that I used, and that one was Southeast Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
Basic, like the other one, I've also created a model for Eastern Hemlock in Minnesota, and I know the Midwest has one.
Okay.
So yes, the answer is yes. These consortiums are regional. Also, there's this website, GBIF, Global Biodiversity Information something,
Mm-hmm.
and it also collects. It's kind of a clearinghouse for all kinds of different herbarium and natural history, records. And in GBIF, they also have basically any taxa, fish, birds, plants, trees, whatever.
Okay. All right. That's cool. So this is a little bit more of a technical question, but is there a minimum number of the plants required to count as an occurrence?
No. And basically, okay, no. And what's really cool is, so no, basically all I need to have is one plant there.
Okay.
What's really cool about MaxEnt in particular is that it is a presence-only modeling methodology.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's compared to a presence absence, where you do need formal absences to actually know where there aren't any.
Okay.
So yeah, but there was a really cool paper that just came out. I can't remember who the lead author on it. I know Dr. Jenny McCune is on it, but basically they used this software and they found that it is good at modeling occurrences, but it isn't. It is not very good at modeling the number, the genetic diversity, the health of the individuals, and stuff like that.
Okay. So it's mostly for like locations and things like that, but not so much for more detailed stuff on the plane itself.
Yeah, exactly. What the way I look at this, I look at it as a okay. We have a species that we weren't really looking at. Where do we like? And we it's across Georgia. Where how do we narrow down the whole state of Georgia to areas that might make sense?
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Let's see. So another technical question here. What are the limitations of the MaxEnt model, and are there any ways that it can give incorrect or misleading results?
Yeah. If you do it wrong, so
Hmm.
uh, there is way. So basically, it can. I don't know about wrong, but maybe like I think like not very useful. Where it models say the whole region as really high habitat suitability,
Hmm.
but it's not really. Uh, and so there's ways that we kind of work around that. There's these things in this model called that we use called pseudo absences or background points.
Hmm.
And basically, so when I made, let's say this model, I didn't actually develop the whole model based on the whole the whole southeast.
Hmm.
I only did it in watersheds that have mountain storia in them, and then extrapolated it out to the rest. That way, I'm not like basically over refining the model. If that makes any sense.
Okay, I got you. So you basically you start a little bit smaller with better known places, and then you let it sort of work out from there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. This you develop a model for those smaller places,
Yeah.
and then you extra plot. Sorry,
Mhm.
you plot it out across whatever your study region is.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense. And that's understandable because I'm sure that simplifies, as much as it can. Uh, at least the initial setup of the model, then you can kind of extrapolate across the whole region and say, all right, now let me look for anything that doesn't look right. That doesn't make any sense. Maybe I need to refine it, whatever. Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. So this is an interesting question. So could you use MaxEnt to I think the question is basically asking like, could you take MaxEnt, do a model like you've done for say the southeast region, and then turn around and apply it to either different regions of the same country or to like other countries around the world?
Yes, and this is where this stuff gets so cool. Okay, so basically, and this is kind of yeah. So okay, let's take. So one way this is commonly done is for like invasive plants,
Mm-hmm.
where let's say there's an invasive plant in England, right?
Yeah.
And you develop well, there's it's native to England, but it's here and it's invading North America.
Mm-hmm.
What you would do is you develop a habitat suitability model in England. And then based on that model, using all those parameters, you would project it to North America, looking at areas that are similar to that region,
Okay.
similar to the British. And similarly, and kind of a similar vein, what you can do is you can create a model, let's say my mountain Stewardian model,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of you can still use the same study area, but you can change the inputs, say the climatic inputs,
Mm-hmm.
to where it's under a scenario of climate change.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's very
So
cool.
so we can see how habitats might be changing under climate change.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Did you- All right, so I guess that makes me think of a follow up question. Then, so if you could do that with the climate stuff, are there any parameters that you could change where like, and so some people work on like altering the properties of plants, right? So they'll splice in a gene or whatever it is that they do. I get way outside of my field, but they people make like food crops more drought resistant, let's say.
Right.
Does this model is there any way to look at something like that where you make an assumption to say, okay, if we could change this parameter about it, let's say make it more tolerant of pH in the soil, something like that. So the pH range that's acceptable is spread out. Could you use this model to predict where how its suitable habitat changes?
Oh
I
man,
don't know if that question
that's a
makes
cool
sense.
question. Yeah, no, it totally does. It totally does. That's a cool question that I haven't thought about. I mean, not off the top of my head, I wouldn't know how to do that.
Okay.
And so if my PI said, "Hey, answer the question that you just gave me,"
Uh huh.
basically what I would do is I would take that mutated plant and plant it around the Georgia and see where it lives,
Hmm.
and then use those as occurrences. So that, but yeah, no, I wouldn't know how to. That's a cool question. How to modify the actual plant itself,
Yeah.
like the occurrences. No, maybe you could only use occurrences where there's less precipitation,
Okay.
and use those as like a potentially a more drought stress genotype or something. I don't know, but that's
Okay.
cool. That's a cool question.
All right. Yeah. Like I said, that was you're talking about like the climate change modeling and like that. That's a really interesting way to look at it. I hadn't thought about something like that, but that's very cool. Um,
Yeah.
But it looks like that's all the questions that we've got. But I want to thank you again for giving your talk. Like I said, this is super cool. I'd never heard of MaxEnt before, and I honestly I didn't realize that you could do this kind of modeling to collect all this information and say, all right, what makes for a good habitat for this particular plant or fish or animal or whatever. That's super cool. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah,
This was fun.
awesome. I'm glad. Let me get you to hang around for just 1 minute, and we'll talk very briefly, and then I'll let you go. For everybody
Awesome.
else, thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. We will be off next week, but we'll be back on March 4th with Dr. Nafisa Dajavdi from Midwestern University. So hopefully you'll come out for that. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, everybody.